Next speaker is Dr. Sher Verik. Specialist on employment, ILO.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Professor Sharma for inviting me to speak in this concluding session. It's very late, and I guess we don't have a lot of time left, so I'll be brief. I also won't be talking specifically about the MDGs or the SDGs, though I'll be talking about issues very much that go to the heart of them. And when I first saw the title of this session, I got a bit scared. Emerging challenges and agenda for South-South cooperation for enhancing human development. Sounds like a very UN type of title for a session. But nonetheless, I think there's some very important elements, and I would like to touch on them. I think we all know, South-South cooperation has become a real buzzword in recent years. Also amongst international organizations like the ILO. At the ILO, we even talk about South-South and triangular cooperation to make sure we're not left out of any of those discussions. I mean, I don't even think the term is good. I think within a decade we probably won't even be using the term. I mean, I think the case for cooperation and discussion between countries is so obvious that it will happen, though of course there are political impediments to it, and particularly in this region. In my deliberations, I'm going to focus, of course, on issues that I work on, employment and labour issues. And I will also focus more on South Asia, also because, my role with the ILO, I cover South Asia. 7 out of 8 SAARC countries, Bhutan is not yet an ILO member. So I draw on some of those experiences. And it's also useful because I just got back from a conference in Lahore on fostering regional cooperation for decent work. One can look at what that conference was for and what the issues were covered. But anyway, I think it was a very useful experience to see where we are when we're looking at regional cooperation. So in the rest of my talk, I just want to cover some of the issues that can be and should be addressed through South Asian cooperation, and also more about how to go about it, more about the policy level. I think there's a lot of cooperation at the research level. We have very good examples of that. And IHD has been very instrumental in promoting that also through the SARNet network, which we've been also involved in with ESCAP. So I'm going to also try to look a bit more at the policy level as well, because I think that's where the cooperation needs to take place, and it's not taking place, particularly because of some of these political impediments that have already been highlighted. Because if you look at the challenges which you're all familiar with in terms of employment, the case for cooperation is clear. Still in most countries, nearly all countries, more than half of workers are still in agriculture. There's a whole challenge of the transition, but at the same time improving productivity. We've heard, Professor Kannan had summarized many of these issues in his summary. The issue of informality, the growing informalization in the informal sector, the issue of contract labor, for example, of course, is very topical here in India, but it is also in Pakistan, where they're facing similar challenges. And the overall whole issue of dualism in the labour market. Other forms of segmentation, disparities based on gender, social group, etc. And ultimately, the issue of low wage and low productivity jobs being the norm. And then that is very much linked to the whole issue of inequality. And so, you're all very familiar with these issues, and you've heard a summary on that and discussions on that in the last 2 days. And but I would also say, in one respect, the situation is improving. I think governments are taking these issues more and more seriously throughout the region. I will, cover some of those points and also why some of that is happening. Particularly, through my almost 2.5, it will be 3 years in September, work in this region, I see in most countries, governments are taking more and more steps to formulate policies, to implement programs that are very substantial. And I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. At the same time, and I'll return to this point later, though I don't have a lot of time, so it can't be too much later, is, of course, countries are being forced to look at these issues. And Rana Plaza is one of them, also, of course, in Karachi as well, and I'll discuss that in a moment, are forcing countries to look at that in a more global context. So, but when we think and see what countries are actually doing in terms of tackling these common employment challenges. I think one of the most common areas is skills development. A lot of resources have gone into skills development in all the countries in this region. You have projects in many millions or hundreds of millions of dollars which have been looking at improving the delivery of skills to improve employability. And you have had large projects, of course, in India through the National Skills Development Policy. Bangladesh has had a large range of projects on skills. Sri Lanka, Pakistan has invested heavily in skills in recent years and is looking to in the coming years. And there have been attempts to improve the coordination of those programs, the involvement of the private sector, standardization and certification, etc. So, given the scale of these programs, that leads, obviously to an opportunity to share experiences in implementing skills program. But to this date, there hasn't been a lot of cooperation or knowledge sharing on how these programs have been developed. But policymakers have the opportunity to learn about delivering such programs, what has been the impact, how can resources be used more efficiently. But, naturally, the M&E systems, monitoring evaluation, is pretty weak in a number of countries. So that, sharing good practices in monitoring and evaluating skills initiatives and developing labour market information systems is critical. And that's really one area where there is a lot to be done within South Asia is on labour statistics and LMIS. And there, of course, that has a link to the MDGs in terms of, and the SDGs to come in terms of monitoring and collecting data. Countries have been doing more in collecting data. Pakistan and Sri Lanka have quarterly labour force surveys. Of course, in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Maldives, Nepal is far more infrequent. India is somewhere in between with its range of different surveys and censuses where data is collected. There are a great opportunity to share experiences on how to collect data for policy making, for monitoring, evaluating progress that can happen within this region. Not enough is happening in this context. Another key area is labour laws, the whole debate around formalisation. I know you've had some discussion on that, the issue of formalisation. And, really, I believe there's some representatives of Brazil here. Clearly, Brazil has had a good case in presenting how, formalisation has taken place in that part of the world. In this part of the world, there's been less success, but there's still, the need to discuss how to promote better enforcement of regulations and more effective regulations, how to, of course, expand social protection for informal workers, etc. I could go on with different issues. There are a whole bunch of issues.
No, we have 6:30.
Yeah. So
whole thing has to come to an end.
So I think in the context of South-South cooperation, the critical issue in this region is also SARC and getting these type of issues on the SARC agenda, which they're not yet on, in particularly from a labour perspective. There is really some, hasn't been much progress. In ASEAN, there has been much more progress. There is a ministerial meeting and a work program on labour issues. At this conference I just attended, there was a call on SARC to take this forward. Just a final point on why countries are also being forced to look at some of these issues in a global context. Naturally, the incidents of Rana Plaza and also in Pakistan has put pressure on countries. Pakistan has been awarded the GSP Plus status from the European Union, which gives us tariff-free access. At the same time, the European Union will be monitoring the compliance with the 8 core ILO conventions and labour standards, but also another 19 UN conventions. So, what we see, the labour standards are increasingly on regional and global agendas, which have been precipitated by Rana Plaza and also in other cases. But it's not only governments that have put on pressure on countries. Walt Disney has dropped Pakistan as a sourcing country because of its alleged poor governance standards. So, taking a positive view of what needs to be done, countries in this region should be talking with each other about how to improve labour standards, not only in the context of their own domestic labour markets, but also in the context of free trade agreements, etc. So I think it's critical to think about the cooperation that can be done at the policy level. I think at the research level, the case is very clear, and a lot is already happening in this region and in this type of forum. So I think ultimately we need to put pressure on SARC. The member states need to take that on their agenda to push for more regional cooperation on these issues, and hopefully we'll see some momentum being built in the coming years. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr.